Egyptian civilization are one of the examples of the ancient civilization, and it is also has become one of the world's longest civilization. The Nile River that flowed from the northern parts of Egypt to the Mediterranean Sea was the longest river, and it is basically a gift of the Egyptian civilization. There was a few numbers of names that were used to call Egypt during that time. For example, was Kemet, which means the black land. This name we believe comes from the fertile soil that is left over when the Nile floods recede in August. The Nile River is one of the unifying factors in Egyptian history because of their agriculture, food supply, and others. The aspect that will be focusing on an evaluation of a legacy of Egyptian civilization are the pharaoh culture, belief, and class distinction.
As we already know, the Egyptian culture has its own specific and real interesting culture to compare with other culture of the ancient civilization. It is famous today for the great monuments which celebrated the triumphs of the rulers and honored the god of the land. The Egyptian culture was in fact life-affirming. What attracts the most, which make it different with others and make it unique, is the existence of pharaoh culture. Pharaoh is the common title used for the monarch of ancient Egypt by the first dynasty until the annexation of Egypt by the Roman Empire in 30 before Christianity era. Although the term pharaoh was not used contemporaneously for a ruler until Merneptah, during the 19th dynasty, king being the term used most frequently until the middle of the 18th dynasty. Furthermore, one of the roles of the pharaoh was as an intermediary between the deities and the people. The pharaoh thus deputized for the deities in a role that was both as civil and religious administrator. The pharaoh owned all of the land, enacted laws, collected taxes, and defended Egypt from invaders as the commander-in-chief of the army that they will protect their country from any enemies. Religiously, the pharaoh officiated over religious ceremonies and chose the sites of new temples. Religion in ancient Egypt was an integral part of the daily life of every Egyptian. The pharaoh also was responsible for maintaining ma'at or cosmic order, balance and justice, and part of this included going to war when necessary to defend the country or attacking others when it was believed that this would contribute to obtain resources. This kind of diverse life should be one of the explicit examples for the rulers nowadays to apply in every nation. Thus, human beings will not be able to live a peaceful life without religion as a way of life. A pharaoh is an ancient Egyptian ruler. Ancient Egypt had many pharaohs. That is because its history is very long. The ancient Egyptian empire lasted from about 3150 BCE to about 31 BCE. There were about 170 pharaohs in all. Most Egyptologists are thinking that Numa was the first pharaoh of Egypt, and they know that Cleopatra VII was the last. Egyptian pharaohs also wore ceremonial clothes during rituals. Many of the things that they wore or carried were symbols of their power and position in Egyptian society. The pharaoh wore a crown that called nims on their head. The nims was a strapped headdress which covers most of the head and extends down at the back and sides. There were tiny cobra on top of the nim's crown is called a uraeus. The uraeus is an upright cobra. It means that the pharaoh is ready to strike at his enemies with venom at any time. Pharaohs also always look like they have a beard, but there was actually a false beard. In real life, most Egyptian men were clean-shaven, but pharaohs, even the female ones, wore false beards that they tied on. Usually, the beards were plaited like a big braid. No one is really sure why the ancient Egyptian pharaohs did this. Since to them, some of their gods had beards, perhaps the pharaohs thought it connected them more closely to the gods. Their also brown object that they hold was called a flail. The flail is a tool that helps to separate grains from their husks. There were some of the pharaoh would hold stripped object called a crook. A crook was a tool used by shepherds to help gather and move their flocks of sheep. Ancient Egyptian pharaohs used many things to symbolize their power and leadership. Just like one of the Nim's crown that looks like a lion's mane. The lion is strong and powerful. He is often called the king of the jungle. The ureus is a venomous cobra about to strike. The crook, a tool of shepherds, show that Pharaoh leads and protects his people.
The class distinction of Egyptian. The definition was the differentiation of one social class from another, also a point of the differentiation between social classes as a characteristic attitude, behavior, etc. This is the hierarchy in the ancient of Egypt. As we can see, the pharaoh was at the top of this hierarchy and followed by the viziers, the nobles, and the priests, and after that the scribes and the soldiers. And at the second lowest was the craftsmen, and at the bottom of this hierarchy were the farmers and the slaves. First of all, I will presenting about the pharaoh because he was at the top ranking of this hierarchy system. And there are many famous titles to the pharaoh such as a god on earth, the horse, the golden horse, the son of Ra, and so on. And because of that, the pharaoh had the ultimate authority in Egypt, which means all of his people must follow all of his orders. In addition, the pharaoh also has his own duties toward Egypt, like firstly, make the laws and maintain order in the kingdom. Secondly, to maintain the army to defend the country from any threats from other countries. And lastly, on all the lands in Egypt. And that's why he was the richest man in Egypt back then. Next, the second highest in this hierarchy system was the viziers. In the simple word, the viziers just like a deputy prime minister. He also served as high priest of Amora, and it also has his duties such as manage the decision system, monitor the supply of food, and he listened to the problems with the nobles and settle them. Upcoming, the priests. Okay, they were the priests in all of the temples in Egypt and has to ensure that temples were running smoothly, like conducting rituals and ceremonies and carry out the daily rituals so that it will satisfy the gods. And they also has their own levels such as like the priest and part-time priests. Next, the same stage with the priests were the nobles. First of all, the main duty of the nobles was holding a government office, such as make local laws and maintain orders. They also enjoy the great status as the nobles, and they also become richer from the donation to the gods and the tributes paid to the pharaoh. Last but not least, they also own farmland which the peasant class worked for them. Upcoming, the scribe were known as the people who can read, write, calculate, and has importance in Egypt. They also keep the record of the country such as the amount of food produced, the number of the soldiers, and so on. The soldiers was at the same stage with the nobles. The duties of the soldiers as we know as to protect the Egypt from outside attacks, and they also keep an eye the lowest classes such as like the peasants, the farmers, and the slave when they build the pyramids, and the palace. After that, the craftsman. Okay, there are many types of the craftsmen, such as the artisan, the carpenter, the jewelers, and so on. And there were also the generation of the craftsmen, and they can work in any part of the Egypt construction, like the pyramid, the palace, and so on. At the bottom of this hierarchy, there were the farmers and the slave. Okay, let's talk about the farmers first. The farmers in Egypt in back then lived in small houses, and the houses were made from the mud brick. They was harvest their various crops such as wheat, barley, fruits, and so on. Lastly, the slave was at the bottom of this hierarchy and were known as the prisoners of war. They worked under the nobles, the royal police, and also at the temples. And as we know, the slave was belonging to their masters. And their scope of jobs such as mine, carry stone, and so on.
The ancient Egyptian was a polytheistic people. Polytheism is a religion with more than one worship god. The ancient Egyptians believed that the gods each had their own area of specialty. Bastet, for example, was the goddess of the heart, women's health and secrets, and of cats. Hathor was the goddess of kindness and love. Osiris was the god of death and resurrection. Among the most important of these gods were Ammon, who became the supreme creator god, symbolized by the sun; Mut was his wife, symbolized by the sun's rays; and Khonsu was their son, the god of healing and destroyer of evil spirits. The ancient Egyptians' beliefs was contradictory to the concept of Tawhid in Islam, which means the oneness of God in the sense that He is one and there is no God but He, as stated in Shahada formula La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Imagine this will lead to the arguments between gods in controlling the universe, such as this situation, which then may lead to chaos in this world. Don't you think so? Next, death and the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians also believed in afterlife, that it was possible to live again after death. Death was regarded not as the end of existence, but simply as a transition to another reality. Numerous tombs of various styles and dates containing carefully prepared bodies reveal an ancient Egyptian belief in afterlife. Egyptians were very concerned of their faith in the afterlife because the afterlife granted eternity to the dead. Therefore, they planned for their deaths for years in advance so that they would survive in it and continue to live in the underworld. Mummification was the first step in preparing for the afterlife in ancient Egypt. The mummy was also provided with a book named The Book of the Dead on how to pass the obstacles, necessities and models of things that would be useful to them in the afterlife. afterlife, they believed that the dead on the way to paradise had to stand trials and defend himself against an assembly of 42 gods, and each of them had to be called by name. The ceremony took place in the Hall of Ma'at, where the judgment of the dead was performed in the afterlife, including the weighing of the heart ceremony. Then the assembly of divine judges announced the verdict. If the heart was lighter than the feather of Ma'at, or its weight was equal, the soul could live on in the afterlife. From the Islamic perspective, we should praise the Egyptians' attitude towards facing death by planning and preparing for it in such a very proper way. Because in Islam, we are also encouraged to prepare for death by doing good deeds. One of the verses in the Holy Quran, which urging the faithful to prepare ourselves for death, is when Allah says, "For each community there is an appointed term. When that time arrives, they can neither delay it for a moment nor could they advance it." Surah Al-A'raf, verse 34. As a conclusion, there are few things that also can be found in Islam. Egyptians believe that the judgment took place in the Hall of Ma'at, while we Muslims believe that the judgment will be performed in Mahsyar field. Other than that, the weighing of the heart can be said similar to Al-Mizan, where the scales of the good deeds and bad deeds will be performed in Mahsyar field in hereafter.
Okay, last but not least, we can conclude that for point Pharaoh culture is this aspect of governance is very important because without a leader, the country will be a mess. With the system of government, there will also be justice because everyone has to abide by the rules set by the leader. Expect then the glory of Islam has been achieved by obedience to the leader, Prophet Muhammad, made by his companions. Okay. Next, belief and religions are important because without these elements, human beings will not be bound by rules. This is because every religion has the same goal, which is to create peace in society. Prophet Muhammad has said, "I live with you two things. As long as you hold them tightly, you will never go astray. They are the book of Allah, Quran, and my Sunnah." And the last one is class distinction. This social organization, to some extent, can contribute greatly to development and progress of Egyptian civilization in terms of economy, politics, and social. However, we are required to serve everyone fairly, give equal rights, and no tyranny or injustice. So, we can reflect that the study of civilization is a field of knowledge which talks about the theory, basic concepts, characteristics, and properties of civilizations conceptually, theoretically, and abstractly. There are many inputs that can be learned in completing this video, and we can learn and explore the life system in ancient Egyptian, includes pharaoh culture, religion, and belief, and also class distinction. Until now, we can see Egypt is growing a lot in sport, tourism, architecture, and others. Okay, that's all from us, and we really hope you will get many input from this video. Thanks for watching, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.